My stepmother thought she got away with it. She had no idea my girlfriend could trace every transaction. What we found in the bank records changed everything. I found out my stepmother stole £143,000 from my dead father's estate on a Tuesday afternoon, sandwiched between a cardiac arrest call in Southville and a routine welfare check in Knoll. I was still wearing my paramedic greens, my hands still smelling like nitrile gloves, when a retired solicitor I barely knew rang my mobile and said, "Callum, something is very wrong with your father's probate." He was right. Something was catastrophically wrong. And by the time I unraveled it, I discovered that the woman who raised me had been planning to rob me since before my dad was even cold. My name is Callum. I'm 31. I'm a paramedic in Bristol, and this is the story of how I almost lost everything my father left me. My mom, Sarah, died of pancreatic cancer when I was 9. She was a midwife at Southmead Hospital. Kindest woman I've ever known. The grief nearly destroyed my dad, Gerald. He was a Royal Mail depot manager in Bedminster. Solid, quiet man who showed love by showing up. But after Mum died, he couldn't be alone. He just couldn't. So 18 months later, he married Lorraine Kemp. She brought along her 7-year-old son, Ethan. And from that moment, the household split into 2 tiers. Ethan was enrolled at Colston School, private, fees paid without question. He got a brand new Vauxhall Corsa at 17. His tuition at Exeter was covered in full. Nobody blinked. I wore Ethan's old school uniforms. I was told 6th form college was good enough. I got a job stacking shelves at the Asda on East Street to pay for my paramedic training at UWI Bristol. When I asked my dad once why things were so different, he just looked tired and said, "Lorraine handles the finances, son. It's complicated." It wasn't complicated. Lorraine controlled every penny, and she'd perfected one line that shut my father down every single time. "After everything I gave up to raise your son," she said it like a weapon, and my dad, who hated conflict the way some people hate loud noises, signed off on whatever she wanted, because fighting her was exhausting, and he didn't have the energy left after losing my mom. I'm not saying my dad was cruel. He wasn't. He loved me. I know that now more than I knew it then. But he was weak where it mattered, and Lorraine exploited that weakness for 22 years. Dad died of a massive stroke at 61, collapsed in the back garden on a Saturday morning in April. I was on shift. By the time I got to the BRI, he was already gone. Lorraine was at the bedside, dry-eyed, already thinking about what came next. At the reading of the will, Lorraine sat in the solicitor's office with her arms crossed, and I watched her face change. My dad had left me £187,500 from his life insurance policy, directly to me. He also left me the 3-bedroom terraced house in Bedminster, our family home, valued at roughly £310,000. Lorraine received a £40,000 cash bequest and Dad's pension. It was generous, more than fair, but the look on her face told me she didn't see it that way. She looked at me like I'd stolen something from her. Within weeks, the comments started. "Your father didn't really mean for you to keep the house. He told me he wanted me to stay." She started referring to herself as the real executor, even though probate hadn't been granted. She stopped answering my calls. Then something strange happened. Ethan, who hadn't spoken to me in 3 years, suddenly texted out of nowhere asking how the estate stuff was going. Casual, friendly, like we were mates. I should have seen it then. The deflection, the silence, Ethan's sudden interest, all of it was choreographed. Lorraine was already moving pieces on a board I didn't even know existed. She'd spent 2 decades maneuvering money toward her son and away from me. A dead man's will wasn't going to stop her. It was just one more obstacle to manage. But I was busy. I was grieving. I was working 12-hour shifts, pulling people out of cardiac arrest and telling families their loved ones didn't make it. I didn't have the bandwidth to be suspicious. I just assumed the process would work, that the will was the will, that the law would protect what my father intended. Then 6 weeks after my father's funeral, I got a phone call from a man I'd met exactly once at a Christmas party. And he told me something that turned my grief into pure, ice-cold fury. Hugh Ansley was 74 years old, retired solicitor. He'd worked with my dad for years on the Bedminster Community Trust. They weren't best mates, but they respected each other the way men of that generation did, quietly, without fuss. Hugh had been asked by the probate court to verify a document Lorraine submitted as part of the estate filing. A codicil, supposedly handwritten by my father, dated 11 days before his death. The codicil stated that the Bedminster house should be transferred to Lorraine in recognition of her decades of care and partnership. It also directed that £143,000 of the life insurance payout be redirected to Ethan to settle outstanding educational debts. Educational debts. Ethan had never paid for anything in his life. Hugh had sat across from my dad at dozens of trust meetings. He knew his handwriting. My father had that tight, leftward slanting script of a man who'd been forced to write right-handed at school in the 70s. The handwriting on the codicil was upright, looping, feminine. Hugh also noticed the document referenced a life insurance policy number that my dad had only received confirmation of 8 days before he died. Whoever wrote that codicil had access to my father's most recent post. Hugh didn't go to Lorraine. He came to me. We met at a cafe on North Street in Bedminster. He ordered a black coffee and laid it all out with the methodical calm of a man who had spent 40 years reading lies for a living. Callum, I don't say this lightly. This codicil is a forgery. The handwriting isn't your father's, and the policy number referenced didn't exist until 8 days before he died. I stared at him. My hands were flat on the table. She actually did it. I thought I was being paranoid. I thought grief was making me suspicious. You weren't paranoid. She's already moved the money. I checked with the probate office. £143,000 was transferred to an account under Ethan's name 4 days ago. 4 days ago? The probate hasn't even been granted yet. How is that legal? It isn't. She used her interim executor access to authorize an early distribution. It's improper at best, fraud at worst. But we'll need more than my gut to prove it. What do we need? Hugh set his coffee down. We need a forensic accountant, a handwriting expert, and someone who isn't afraid to make Lorraine Kemp very, very uncomfortable. I walked out of that cafe and something had shifted inside me. The grief was still there, but it had company now. Rage. Not the hot, explosive kind. A paramedic's rage. Controlled. Diagnostic. Focused. I'd spent a decade arriving at scenes where someone's life had been wrecked by another person's recklessness or cruelty, and I'd trained myself to act, not react. Assess the damage. Stabilize the patient. Work the problem. That's exactly what I was going to do now. I went home that night and told my girlfriend everything. Priya Sharma, 30 years old, forensic accountant at a mid-sized firm in Clifton. She'd spent 4 years tracing embezzlement through layered shell companies for clients who hid money in places most people didn't know existed. A forged codicil and a redirected insurance payout was, in her words, a Tuesday. She didn't hesitate, not for a second. She told me she'd do the financial tracing pro bono, and I could see in her face this wasn't a favor. This was personal. Priya had been at every family gathering for 3 years. She'd watched Lorraine patronize me in front of relatives, watched Ethan treat me like the help at my own father's birthday dinners. She'd bitten her tongue because I'd asked her to, because I didn't want to cause problems for Dad. But Dad was gone now, and the woman who'd spent 2 decades draining his goodwill was trying to drain his estate too. Hugh Ansley wasn't family. He wasn't obligated to do any of this. He was just a principled man who refused to watch a dead friend's son get robbed. He provided the forensic eye, the probate knowledge, and the credibility I needed to be taken seriously. Without him, none of what came next would have happened. He could have looked at that codicil, shaken his head, and gone back to his retirement. Instead, he picked up the phone and called a stranger. I'll never forget that. Within 72 hours, Priya had pulled the bank records. And what she found wasn't just theft. It was a pattern that went back years. Priya worked nights and weekends for 3 straight weeks. She started with a £143,000 transfer from the estate holding account to an account under Ethan's name at Lloyd's, authorized by Lorraine using her interim executor credentials before probate had even been granted. A clear breach of fiduciary duty. But that was just the headline number. She pulled 3 years of my dad's bank statements and found something none of us expected. Lorraine had been siphoning £800 to £1,200 per month from Dad's current account into a savings account solely in her name, month after month, for 3 years. Total diversion, approximately £31,000. Money that should have formed part of the estate. Money my dad almost certainly never knew was missing because Lorraine managed every bill, every statement, every direct debit in that house. She'd been stealing from him while he was alive. She just got bolder once he was dead. Hugh commissioned a certified handwriting analyst from a forensic document service in London. The report came back unambiguous. The codicil was not written by Gerald. Letter formation, pen pressure, and slant were consistent with a different author and bore strong similarities to Lorraine's own handwriting on signed documents already in the probate file. She hadn't even tried to disguise it properly. Then Priya found the detail that buried them. Lorraine had submitted a scanned PDF of the codicil to the probate office digitally. Priya's firm ran metadata analysis on that file. The creation date was 6 days after my father's death. 6 days after. The document was supposedly written 11 days before he died. It was impossible, and it was right there in the file properties for anyone competent enough to look. I got one more piece. My dad's GP provided a witness statement confirming that Gerald had been lucid and making no changes to his estate planning in the weeks before his death. No conversations about altering the will, no mention of Lorraine or the house, nothing. That destroyed her entire story about Dad having a change of heart. When my solicitor sent Lorraine a formal letter requesting an explanation of the financial discrepancies, she didn't back down. She went on the attack. She rang my Aunt Carol, my cousins in Keynsham, even old neighbors on our street. She told every single one of them that I was trying to throw my grieving stepmother out of her own home, that I'd always resented Ethan for being more successful. She posted on Facebook, without naming me directly, but clearly enough, something about ungrateful children who only care about money when someone dies. 14 people liked it. 3 of them were my relatives. Ethan sent me a text from Bath where he was working as a sales manager. Drop this, or I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are. I screenshot it and forwarded it to Hugh. When the social pressure didn't work, Lorraine hired her own solicitor and filed a counterclaim. She argued that my dad had verbally promised her the house on multiple occasions, that the codicil was genuine, that I was exerting undue influence on the probate process. She even claimed Priya had a conflict of interest because of her relationship with me. The counterclaim was thin, desperate, expensive, but it forced me to respond formally, which meant more legal fees and more time. That was the point. She was trying to bleed me out. Hugh told me to stop engaging with Lorraine personally, stop answering the calls, stop reading the Facebook posts, let the evidence speak through the court. He connected me with a litigation solicitor named Diana Beckett at a firm in Queen Square who specialized in contested probate. Diana reviewed the full dossier in one sitting, the handwriting analysis, the metadata report, the bank trail, the GP statement, the timeline proving the codicil couldn't have been written when Lorraine claimed. She looked up from the papers and said, "This isn't even close." She's done. Diana filed a fraud claim through Bristol County Court within 10 days. Priya prepared a forensic accounting summary that laid out every diverted pound in a clear, court-ready format, every transfer dated, every discrepancy documented. Diana also requested an interim freezing order on Ethan's Lloyd's account to prevent the 143,000 pounds from disappearing before judgment. The court granted it. The hearing was set for a Thursday morning at Bristol County Court, and Lorraine walked in, wearing a black dress and a gold cross necklace, looking like she genuinely believed she was going to win. Bristol County Court, Thursday morning, 10 a.m. I sat with Diana Beckett on one side of the room. Lorraine sat with her solicitor on the other, black dress, gold cross necklace, still performing the grieving widow. Ethan was behind her, arms crossed, jaw tight, staring at the table like it owed him something. District Judge Hargreaves had clearly read the file. Diana presented the evidence methodically, handwriting analysis first, then the metadata contradiction, then the bank records, then the GP statement. Each piece laid out clean and calm, like instruments on a surgical tray. Lorraine's solicitor tried to argue that the handwriting differences were explained by Gerald's declining health, and that the metadata could have been a scanning error. Hargreaves didn't blink. He looked directly at Lorraine. Mrs. Kemp, can you explain how this document was created digitally 6 days after the deceased passed away, when you claim it was handwritten 11 days before? Lorraine froze. I watched her throat move. Then she said, Gerald told me what he wanted. I was just making sure his wishes were honored. The judge paused. What you describe is fabrication, Mrs. Kemp. This document is not the will of the deceased. It is yours. He ruled the codicil fabricated and void. He ordered full restitution of the 143,000 pounds to my estate. He awarded 22,000 pounds in legal costs against Lorraine, and he referred her case to Avon and Somerset Police for potential forgery and fraud charges under the Fraud Act 2006. Lorraine's solicitor requested leave to appeal. Denied. As we left the courtroom, Ethan caught me in the corridor. He didn't apologize. He said, I didn't know it was forged. I looked at him. You didn't ask. That was a choice. He returned every penny within 14 days. His solicitor explained that accessory to fraud charges were a real possibility, and suddenly, Ethan's loyalty to his mother had a price tag he wasn't willing to pay. Lorraine was formally investigated by Avon and Somerset Police, charged with fraud by false representation and forgery. The criminal case was still pending when I wrote this. Her reputation in Bedminster collapsed. Neighbors who'd believed her Facebook posts quietly distanced themselves once the court ruling made the local news. The woman who'd spent decades controlling the narrative lost control of it overnight. Ethan cut contact with everyone. Lorraine, me, the whole family. He moved to Leeds, deleted his social media. As far as I know, he never spoke to anyone in the family again. The 31,000 pounds Lorraine had siphoned during my dad's lifetime was harder to recover, but Diana filed a separate claim. That was still in process, too. Several relatives who'd initially sided with Lorraine sent me texts afterwards. Not quite apologies. More like, hope you're doing all right, Cal. Close enough for me to understand what they meant. I didn't respond to most of them. My Aunt Janet, Dad's sister, came to see me in person. She sat in my dad's old kitchen and admitted she'd believed Lorraine's version because it was easier than thinking someone in the family could do that. She brought a photo album. Gerald and Sarah, before I was born. Mum in a yellow dress at some barbecue, laughing at something Dad had said. Dad looking at her like she was the only person in the garden. Janet said, Your dad would be proud of you. He always was. He just didn't know how to show it around her. It wasn't enough to erase 20 years of silence, but it was something. I kept the album on the shelf above my paramedic kit bag. I sold the Bedminster house for 325,000 pounds, on my terms, to a young couple with a toddler who reminded me of what that house could have been. I put aside money for a deposit on a flat in Totterdown with Priya, invested some, and I donated 5,000 pounds to the Bristol branch of Crew's Bereavement Care. The charity that had helped me after my mum died, when no one in my family knew what to say. I kept working as a paramedic. I didn't quit, didn't pivot, didn't use the money as an escape. The job still mattered. Saving strangers still mattered. But now, for the first time, I had proof that someone had fought to save me too. My dad wasn't perfect. He let Lorraine run the show because he was tired and broken and scared of being alone. I understand that now. But he did one thing right. He put my name on that policy, and he put my name on that house. That was his voice, speaking from the only place he felt safe enough to speak. And when someone tried to erase it, two people I barely deserved, a retired solicitor and a woman who loved me enough to work weekends tracing stolen money, made sure his voice was heard. I don't think I'll ever stop being angry about the years I lost. But I'm done letting that anger be the loudest thing in the room. The loudest thing now is the life I'm actually building. And it's mine.